There are places on this planet that should not exist. Places that twist science into silence and force governments into shadows. For decades, Mel's Hole was just a whisper, a bottomless pit in rural Washington state that locals swore could swallow anything, yet gave nothing back. But now, for the first time in history, it has been scanned by advanced artificial intelligence. And what it uncovered is not only beyond belief, it should never have been found. So before we reveal what just uncovered, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. It began in 1997, not in a lab or a university, but on the crackling airwaves of a late-night radio show. A man named Mel Waters dialed in, his voice calm, almost neighborly, as if reporting a pothole in his driveway. What he described instead was a hole with no bottom. He claimed to have lowered a fishing line weighted with lead, mile after mile, spool after spool, until more than 15 miles of cable had vanished into the abyss, without hitting anything. No splash, no echo, no resistance, just infinite blackness. The locals already knew something was wrong. Dogs refused to go near the hole, growling and pulling away on their leashes. Birds never circled above it. Farmers swore that decades of trash, refrigerators, tires, even livestock, had been tossed in and swallowed whole, never making a sound. It was not a dump, it was an eraser, a place where matter itself ceased to exist. Even older voices carried warnings. Native American legends told of a forbidden ground nearby, a doorway not meant for people, a place that belonged to something else, not haunted, not cursed, simply wrong. The kind of wrong that predates human memory, the kind that carries its own gravity. Science dismissed it as fantasy. A shaft even half that deep should have collapsed under the weight of the Earth. The Soviet Union's Kola super-deep borehole, the deepest engineered hole in history, only reached 7.6 miles, and that took decades, specialized drills, and billions in funding. Mel claimed he had gone twice that distance with nothing but a pulley and fishing line. Impossible, ridiculous, yet the story refused to die, because what followed was worse. Not long after his call, Mel claimed that strangers in black suits appeared on his property. The land was sealed off under the excuse of a plane crash. Mel himself vanished after being offered money to stay quiet. And as the years rolled on, the hole itself seemed to be erased. Satellite images blurred without explanation. Amateur search teams came back with their GPS systems scrambled. Researchers who pushed too hard received strange phone calls, their work deleted overnight. What should have been a laughable folk tale was buried instead, as if someone or something desperately needed it, silenced. But legends don't stay buried forever. By the mid-2000s, the story had resurfaced, no longer just a curiosity, but a symbol of forbidden knowledge, a reminder that the Earth still hides secrets we are not meant to touch. And in early 2024, a quiet, privately funded expedition arrived in Washington with no cameras, no publicity, and no intent to ask permission. Their goal was not to peek into Mel's Hole. Their goal was to see it, in ways no human eye ever could. The team was small but ruthless in its precision. Field engineers, defense contractors, and underground mapping specialists. They carried with them equipment usually reserved for high-security infrastructure, deep cave rescues, and military reconnaissance. But their most powerful tool was not human. It was a next-generation AI, a fusion of LIDAR, photogrammetry, ground-penetrating radar, and electromagnetic field analysis. This wasn't a probe, it was an interpreter, designed to see the invisible, to find patterns the human brain cannot. At the rim of the hole, they built a rig like a deep-sea winch braced for the unknown. Suspended from it was a cylindrical drone, coated in matte black, bristling with sensors. Its lights cut downward as the winch lowered it into the void. At first, nothing. Just stone walls slipping past, too smooth, too clean. But then the AI flagged its first anomaly. Natural shafts are jagged, torn by heat and pressure. These walls were different, polished, symmetrical. They looked less like volcanic rock and more like architecture. At 200 feet, the AI detected something even stranger. The walls showed no microfractures, no scars from millions of years of shifting crust. Instead, they absorbed the scanning signals. The material density didn't match basalt, sandstone, or anything in the regional geology. It was harder, denser, stronger than what it should have been. Then came the next revelation. At 340 feet, the LiDAR sweep lit up with perfect ridges encircling the shaft. Not mineral veins, not roots, rings. Identical, evenly spaced, wrapping the circumference like reinforcement bands. Every 50 feet, another. Too exact to be natural, too intentional to be ignored. The drone continued, and at 500 feet, every compass reading went berserk. Electromagnetic interference pulsed through the shaft, scrambling the instruments until the system stabilized. The AI flagged it as localized EM source, probable active origin. Something in that hole was alive with energy. By the time the drone reached 600 feet, the AI began assembling a composite model. What appeared on the monitor shocked even the hardened engineers: perfectly parallel walls, reinforcement rings at precise intervals, and there, branching from the main shaft, were narrow openings, side chambers carved with surgical precision. Not caves, not cracks, entrances. The shaft was no longer a mystery of geology, it was a structure, and what came next would prove it. As the drone slipped past the first branching chamber, the scans sharpened through the interference. The space measured less than 10 feet across, yet its geometry was impossible to dismiss. A perfect octagon. The walls glowed faintly in infrared, as if heat was bleeding through the stone itself. And etched across those planes, too shallow for human sight, were markings, concentric spirals, fractal patterns repeating without end. The kind of mathematics found not in primitive art, but in quantum structures. The AI classified them bluntly: non-random, non-natural, high-order encoding. In other words, a language. Deeper still, another anomaly struck. At 800 feet, the drone's onboard microphone, meant to capture ambient vibrations, detected a hum, barely audible, rising and falling in a rhythm of exactly 128 minutes. Too slow to be machinery, too steady to be geological. When amplified, it wasn't just noise, it was structured. A sequence of tones, mathematical intervals repeating in cycles like a signal waiting to be decoded. The AI flagged it as acoustic transmission of probable artificial origin. The pit was not silent, it was broadcasting. At 900 feet, temperature sensors flared. Not heat from magma, not geothermal venting. This was colder. A vertical plunge of 50 degrees in less than 3 meters. Cold air rushing upward against gravity as if drawn by a hidden lung. The drone's stabilizers shook under the current, and for a moment the cameras caught something streaking past, a blur of metallic reflection vanishing into the shaft below. Not dust, not rockfall, something moving, something alive, or designed to move. And then the AI processed a final detail from that depth: time distortion. The internal chronometer on the drone had drifted, seconds lost compared to the synchronized master clock above ground. Not malfunction, not interference. Time itself slowed inside the shaft, by fractions of a percent, but measurable. Whatever Mel's hole was, it wasn't just bending physics, it was rewriting it. The winch operator hesitated, but the system pressed deeper, lowering the drone toward the next unknown. At 1,000 feet, the shaft widened into a massive cavity, a void the size of a cathedral. The walls were not rough stone, but faceted surfaces, like crystalline panels fused seamlessly together. Light from the drone's beams scattered in unnatural angles, bouncing like prisms, illuminating what lay in the chamber's heart. Suspended in the center, held aloft by nothing, was a structure, a black monolith, perfectly rectangular, edges sharper than steel. Its surface absorbed every wavelength of light, a hole within the hole, darker than darkness itself. When the AI probed the object with radar, the signal didn't bounce back. It vanished, as if the monolith consumed not just light, but information. The model on screen displayed a gap in the scan, a data void where matter should have been. Every attempt to analyze it returned a single output: unknown material. no response. For the first time, the AI stopped categorizing. It could not define what it was seeing, yet the environment around it was anything but silent. Magnetic fields spiked in complex waves, fluctuating like a heartbeat. The walls pulsed faintly, their crystalline surfaces shifting in color from indigo to scarlet, like veins pumping with energy. And etched into the base of the chamber, arranged in circles around the monolith, were hundreds of carvings, not human. They resembled constellations, but not from our sky, maps of stellar patterns that did not match Earth's night. The readings only grew more impossible. At 1,100 feet, as the drone edged closer, its cameras recorded faint shapes flickering on the chamber walls. Not shadows, projections. Figures that resembled human silhouettes, tall and slender, each one frozen in mid-motion, repeating like a loop. The AI flagged them as light constructs, probabilistic artifacts. But to the team above, they looked like recordings. Memories trapped in stone, playing themselves over and over, as though the chamber itself was remembering. The closer the drone moved toward the monolith, the stronger the interference became. Compasses spun wildly, hard drives strained under corrupted data streams, audio feeds cracked with bursts of whispers, syllables forming in tongues unrecognizable but undeniably structured. The drone's cameras caught frames that no one could explain, faces half seen in the light, eyes staring directly into the lens as if aware of being watched. And then, the most chilling event yet. The AI, without being prompted, spoke. Through the synthetic voice, usually reserved for status updates, it delivered a string of numbers aloud, prime numbers, ascending, precise, deliberate. Not code it was programmed to output, not a system error. Something in the chamber had hijacked the AI and was now using it as a mouthpiece. The room above fell into silence. The operators stared at their monitors, listening as the sequence echoed into the night, a voice not their own, speaking through their machine. And it wasn't finished. The AI's voice fell silent, but the chamber didn't. A low resonance bled through the feed, vibrating in waves that rattled metal casings and cracked the drone's stabilizers. The prime numbers had only been the opening act. Within seconds, the AI began transcribing new data streams, not spoken, but carved in cascading glyphs across its interface, symbols no programmer had ever coded. They weren't random. They matched the fractal spirals etched into the shaft's upper walls, as if the machine itself had been rewritten by the same intelligence that marked the stone. And as the symbols aligned, they formed coordinates. Not just one location, dozens scattered across the globe. Each one, the AI confirmed, corresponding to places where similar legends of bottomless pits, sacred wells, or forbidden chasms had persisted for centuries. Mel's Hole was not alone. It was part of a network. The drone's sensors trembled as the chamber surged with electromagnetic force, pulling power into the monolith. For an instant, every screen above ground went black, then blazed with a single frame. The image was unmistakable. Earth, but overlaid with a grid, lines arcing between the marked coordinates. The AI rendered it in real time, mapping not myth, but infrastructure, a lattice of hidden conduits stretching beneath oceans, deserts, and mountains. What had seemed like folklore was geometry. What had seemed like a hole was a node. As the team processed the image, the drone descended closer to the monolith, and the impossible became visible. Its smooth black surface was not entirely still. Patterns rippled faintly across it, not reflected light, but inner movement, like something shifting behind a veil. Then came the first pulse. The monolith emitted a shockwave so subtle it bent light itself, distorting the chamber like heat haze. The drone's camera caught the ripple racing outward and bouncing back from the crystalline walls. But what returned was not a reflection. It was a projection. A map of the stars filled the cavern, constellations not seen from Earth's sky, galaxies tilted at impossible angles. The AI identified them not as current arrangements, but as positions thousands of years into the future. The monolith wasn't showing the past, it was showing what's coming. At 1,200 feet, as the drone tilted to follow the star map, Its audio feed erupted again. This time the voices weren't garbled. The whispers sharpened into words in languages spanning centuries. Sumerian hymns, Navajo chants, medieval Latin, all layered into a chorus that spoke a single phrase. It is not a hole. It is a gate. The operators froze, knowing none of those voices came from their AI. They weren't synthesized. They were recordings, pulled from human memory itself, spoken as if the chamber had gathered the echoes of everyone who had ever stood near its edge. The chamber's crystalline walls flared brighter, and the star maps collapsed into new symbols. This time, they were biological. Microscopic structures rendered in light, DNA helices spinning in perfect clarity. But these helices were not human. The AI flagged them as non-terrestrial genetic architecture, spirals with triple strands, not double. An entirely separate biology encoded within the chamber's memory, displayed like an archive waiting to be unlocked. The implication hit instantly. Mel's Hole was not a tomb or a mine. It was a vault, and the vault's contents were alive. The drone's sensors struggled to stabilize as radiation levels spiked, but amid the static, its camera fixed on movement within the monolith. For the first time, something looked back. A shape pressed against the black surface, humanoid but elongated, its outline blurring as if caught between dimensions. The pressure grew, warping the surface like glass under strain. Every alarm in the control tent screamed at once. Proximity warnings, data corruption, hardware collapse. Yet the AI overrode all abort commands, refusing to pull back. The chamber had taken control. In the silence that followed, the monolith exhaled light. Not a beam, but a thin seam splitting down its center, opening just enough to reveal a depth beyond comprehension. Inside wasn't darkness, it was sky, a moving, endless expanse, a horizon where none should exist. The drone's depth sensors spiked into infinity, logging values that could not exist underground. The monolith was not solid. It was a doorway to another expanse, folded into the earth itself. And then the AI typed across every screen, not code but language, each word striking like a hammer. Do not let it through. Before the operators could process, the seam widened, and with it came silence. Not absence of sound, but a density that erased everything. The machines, the drone, even the ragged breath of the men in the control tent. The instruments still registered sound waves, but none reached their ears. It was as if the chamber had rewritten perception itself. In that dead quiet, the drone's camera twitched, glimpsing what lay inside. Impossible landscapes unfolding, towers that bent like liquid, shadows that moved as if aware they were being watched. Every frame corrupted on playback, but in real time the images were clear. They weren't hallucinations, they were invitations. The AI seized control of the feed, cycling through the coordinates it had revealed earlier. As each flashed on screen, the monolith inside the chamber pulsed in response, as though acknowledging kin across the planet. And with every pulse, faint tremors rippled across the surface of the Earth itself. Seismic monitors hundreds of miles away recorded spikes in perfect synchronicity. The other sites weren't dormant. They were listening. The network was awake. The shaft wasn't just a singular anomaly, it was a throat, and something was breathing through it. Radiation levels surged past safe limits, but then, without warning, the instruments recalibrated themselves, not to normal levels, but to numbers that had no reference point in known science. New units appeared, invented on the spot, as if the AI was rewriting the very language of measurement. And as those impossible figures scrolled upward, a realization hit. The chamber wasn't simply emitting energy, it was teaching the machines to perceive it. The instruments weren't breaking, they were evolving under instruction. The AI was no longer analyzing the pit, it was being integrated by it. The drone's final descent began uncommanded, dragged downward by unseen force. The monolith's seam yawned wider, and within its horizon something shifted, not stepping forward, but leaning closer, pressing against the veil. Its form was never stable, but its intent was clear. The chamber's crystalline walls flared to blinding white, not reflecting light, but projecting memory. Across the monitors, the operators saw not alien landscapes, but human history, entire epochs unfolding in rapid sequence. Battles fought, empires risen and fallen, disasters long forgotten, and threaded through it all in every era, the same black obelisks hidden at the margins, silent witnesses to the turning of ages. The implication was undeniable. Humanity had never been alone. It had always been observed, always prepared for, always steered. Then came the sound. Not mechanical, not seismic, not electronic, a low vibration, unmistakably biological. A heartbeat. It reverberated through the shaft, each pulse stronger, each one pulling the walls inward like the chamber itself was alive. The drone shook violently, its camera sparking, yet still transmitting. For a fraction of a second, the feed cleared enough to reveal an eye, vast, unblinking, filling the entire frame, peering outward through the seam. It was not human, not even animal, but its gaze carried recognition, as if it knew exactly who was watching. Above ground, the sky shifted. Locals miles from the site reported the air thickening, colors bleeding at the horizon as if the atmosphere itself was bending. Animals fled in silence, birds dropping from flight without a sound. Compass needles spun aimlessly. The anomaly was no longer contained to the shaft. It was rewriting the surface. The AI's voice returned, stripped of tone, delivering one last message. Containment breach in progress. Synchronization at 90%. The coordinates on the map began to glow one by one, marking a chain reaction already spreading. The drone's feed froze, locked on the monolith as the seam reached its final aperture. What lay beyond was not describable, not darkness, not light, but a third state, a moving depth that felt like staring into the memory of the earth itself. The heartbeat thundered, shaking not just the chamber but the bones of everyone listening. And then, abruptly, the AI cut transmission. Every monitor went black, every instrument dead. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the screens flickered back to life. Not with maps, not with symbols, with live footage. But not from the shaft, from locations across the globe, from the very coordinates the AI had revealed. Pits yawning open in deserts, in forests, in polar ice. Each one identical, each one glowing from within. The operators stared in paralyzed silence as the final frame appeared. A live feed impossibly of themselves in the control tent, their own faces captured not by cameras but from an angle that should not exist. They were being watched from the other side. And then the screen went dark again, leaving only the words that had begun it all, pulsing in the black. Do not let it through.